It is Thursday, May 23rd, 2024, and you're watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem. So happy you're here where we talk about all things Asian MMA, running through the news from the last weekend, previewing what's ahead, covering major topics, all that good stuff, and eventually taking your questions as well. Got a lot that happened last weekend in the world of Asian MMA as Road to UFC opening round, this thing that we talk about almost every weekend, finally happened. And while I gave you most of my thoughts on Road to UFC already in the 2 immediate reaction videos, you can check those out on my channel later. But anything else, any leftovers, we can get to those today, as well as any questions you have about or comments on Road to UFC. Would love to hear those. Yeah, I guess without further ado, I will go ahead and get into things. So Road to UFC, first thing up for today. Basically, one thing that I thought was really interesting was that there was only 3 finishes out of the whole entire 2-day event. I realized we did drop 2 fights there, but still, I feel like that was a little bit low. And, what's the reason for that? Why were there only 2 finishes? I think that there's 2 reasons I can think of. One is that we had one of the weight classes was the women's strawweight division, which I don't think that they're any less exciting fights, but statistically speaking, you're probably a little less likely to get finishes out of that. That being said, we did get one of our finishes out of Feng Xiaosan versus Kieran Singh. And that fight was, I would say that was one of the biggest mismatches of the whole event. And Feng Xiaosan just kind of tore through Kieran Singh like butter. So that was one of your finishes. But overall, the women probably a little less likely to get the finish. I think the other reason that there wasn't a finish, and this is honestly kind of a compliment on Road to UFC, is that I feel like there were overall less really weak fighters this year. What do I mean by that? Sometimes promotions promotions right under the UFC may tout their high finishing rate. And while that can be an element that makes fights more exciting, it can also be a sign of mismatches. A lot of times, if you have 2 really high level fighters, I think you may be less likely to get a finish. I would love to see what is the if you look at the UFC lightweight division, for example. I would just bet, don't have the numbers to back this up, I would bet that if you look at the top 15 fighters and then you look at, say, the bottom 15 or 20 fighters, if you were to rank them all, I would venture to bet that the fighters in their UFC fights on the bottom have a higher finishing rate than the ones at the top. Or there's probably a couple different ways you could sort that out. But as you get higher up, the fighters, not only is their offense increasing, but their defense is increasing as well. You're not going to have as many one-sided fights. You're not going to have as many fighters that are really one-sided and get exposed in one area of their game, leading to a finish. Striker that gets submitted, or grapple-heavy fighter that gets knocked out, things like that. So one championship, or almost said Pride, Ryzen could tout a high finishing rate, but that could also be because of the mismatches. This year, we didn't have any Indonesian fighters who got finished a lot last year. We had 2 of our 3 Indian fighters were women, and actually the Indian fighter that was a male also got one of the 3 finishes as well, Angad Bisht. And so, and I only bring that up just because historically in the past, the Indian and Indonesian fighters, except for Anshul Jubli, have been the ones that I would say are some of the weaker fighters of the whole tournament. And I think that was one of the reasons. Now, could you say some of the fighters didn't fight as hard? Potentially, you could make that argument for a few of the fighters. I don't necessarily think it was that they weren't fighting hard or trying to find the finish. But yeah, so I think that's mostly why. And the reality is that while there were some fights that were really exciting, Masuto Kawana against Song Young Jae, I thought that fight was great. Tetsuya Saika versus Kiwan Bean, another really exciting fight. There wasn't a whole lot of just crazy brawls. You're not going to have that every single year, every single round. I remember last year, the semifinal round was a little bit slower. Perhaps this year, the semifinal round will be more exciting. Who knows? But overall, I mean, yeah, the fighters that stood out to me the most, Angad Bisht, Feng Xiaozan, Wang Tsong, who's already in the UFC. Masuto Kawana, I thought overperformed according to my expectations. So, and a lot of other fights that were really interesting, even if they lacked a lot of really dramatic moments. So I was overall pleased with Road to UFC this year. I think that there's a lot of really, really high level talent in Road to UFC. So I'm looking forward to the semifinal round. I have heard a potential date for the semifinals. It is right at the end of the summer. I am trying to confirm that with a couple people because the thing is like you can have a targeted date, but then a lot of that depends on if the fighters are healthy. If a couple of fighters need just a little bit more time, are they going to push it back a few weeks? Who knows? There's also the possibility of the UFC event going down in China as well. So I'll hold back from sharing those just yet, but right there at the end of the summer for that semifinal round. All right, let's move on. I talked about Road to UFC all the time, so I will move on from that. Let me know if you have any more questions. This weekend, there are a handful of Asian MMA events, and you can check out which ones those are on my website, MMAecosystem.com. Check that out for sure. The one that I was going to get to was this Deep Jewels event. Sometimes they knock it out of the park with their matchmaking. Sometimes they struggle. A little bit of both here. You have I'm going to share the fight card here, but I always think it's interesting. Rin Nakai fighting on this Deep Jewels event. She's been fighting with Deep Jewels a lot, really, since she fought in the UFC. And it is hard to be a flyweight in Asia and a woman. Really hard. Well, actually, I'm not going to share it because I don't know if Tapology has the right of. Hold on, let me get a different view here. Let me take you to my page. It looks like Tapology doesn't have the updated fight card on there. So let's take a look here. I've got the calendar pulled up here for the weekend. Lots of events going down. Jeez. All right. So you've got a couple solid fights here. You've got Saori Oshima fighting Aya Murakama for the microweight title of Deep Jewels. Really, Saori Oshima can rule that microweight division because that's a very small division. And looking down there, so you've got Rin Nakai fighting Namiko Jaime Kawabata. Jaime she's got a 4-3 record. Really, those 3 losses are to really good fighters. It's kind of unfortunate. I mean, she's kind of just the next victim of MMA matchmaking in that as a young fighter with not a lot of fights, she has gotten matched up against really tough fighters. And it's the same here. I mean, and part of that is, there's just not a lot of fighters at flyweight in Asia. Rin Nakai is another one of them. I don't know why Rin Nakai has not taken her talents internationally, or at the very least to Ryzen. Ryzen could at the very least bring in some fighters from around the world. I mean, flyweight is internationally a really deep division. In Asia, it's not. I don't know why she hasn't tried to fight more internationally, or at least for Ryzen. She's kind of stuck fighting against foes that are really overmatched. At this point, I don't think that she's going to make it back to the UFC. I don't know if the UFC is all that interested in her. Unfortunately, I wish they would give her one more shot, but I don't think that's going to happen at this point. Now, Rin Nakai was supposed to fight someone else. That fight fell through, and now she's fighting Jaime here. I mean, what can you say? It's going to be another win for Rin Nakai. It's going to set Jaime down to a 4-4 record. It is what it is. Interim strawweight title against Park Seo-woo versus Machi Fukuda. That's a great fight. Fukuda just lost her last fight, and this is a big. It's honestly kind of even a step up since her last fight, and so I was kind of surprised that she went right back into the fire again against Park Seo-woo. But I think Park Seo-woo could be the best Korean out. Okay, other than Ham So-hee, I think Park is probably the top woman from Korea outside the UFC right now. So I expect I would probably lean towards Park Seo-woo to win this. But yeah, a lot of great Asian women on this Deep Jewels card, especially there at the top. Will definitely, I think the fight to watch there is Park Seo-woo versus Machi Fukuda. Let's see, what else do we got here? So speaking of Asian WMMA, Stamp Fairtex, she has torn her ACL. She is out of her 167 fight against Denise Sambawanga on June, I believe that was June 5th. And she just had surgery. Denise Sambawanga already has another opponent in Noelle Grandjean. But guys, I mean, you high risk, high reward, right? With Stamp Fairtex double booking her. Big possibility that one championship loses not one, but two of their main events for some of their biggest shows of the year. This 167 card overall is a really good card. 2 title fights. Otherwise, lots of big names on the card. Lots of good fights, but they've lost the main event there. A Thai MMA champion defending the belt in Bangkok. That was a slam dunk. They've lost that fight and probably going to lose their main event on 168 in September in Denver as well. And while there are other fights that could be the main event for that card, I think there's no, I mean, you don't have ACL surgery and come back just over 3 months later. Basically Stamp Fairtex, if she wants to make the main event of 168, she has to recover from ACL surgery in a month, right? If you want to have a training camp, 8-week training camp, that puts the timeline for recovery of 1 month for an ACL surgery. That's impossible. Stamp Fairtex, I'm just going to say it, she's not going to fight in September against Xiong Jingnan. They need to find a different main event for that card, or just bump up one of the other fights. But the thing is that one championship, they're going to promote Stamp Fairtex in the main event as long as they possibly can to try to sell as many tickets as they can. In fact, let's just take a look, shall we? Let's take a look at the One Championship website. All right. So let's go to their upcoming events. So they've already taken Stamp off the graphic here for 167. But look at there, 168 in Denver. There she is. And who do we have on the website? Stamp Fairtex. I don't know what they're waiting. I mean, I'm guessing that they would be waiting on an official timeline for recovery for Stamp Fairtex. But guys, I mean, come on, a month. Like, you're saying that Stamp Fairtex has to come back from ACL surgery in a month. There's not only recovery, but then there's physical therapy. You got to strengthen that knee. if you try to come back super quickly, you're going to blow it out again. And then you're going to have another surgery, longer recovery time. Pull the plug, guys. At least, you know, I can forgive them if they're going to announce it in the next couple days, but you know, one championship, they have a reputation for basically like a fight will be off for a long time and they're still promoting it. You know, a big fight, it'll be off for a while, but they're still going to pretend like it's happening, not remove it from websites, graphics, all of that, to try and sell as many tickets as possible. Totally what's happening here. This is exactly what I said would happen. Is like, if you double book fighters and then someone drops out, then you have multiple events falling apart. Not looking good for this Denver show, especially with UFC going to Denver mid-July, just 7 weeks before the show in September. However, they've been selling tickets for a while, so I think they may be okay. They're probably just going to end up selling or giving away thousands and thousands of tickets is what I'm guessing is going to go down there. So I hate to say I told you so. Feel bad for Stamp Fairtex. Obviously not her fault. But I mean, if anyone else falls out, I mean, guys, like you look at the 167 card, what was it? 4 of those fighters were double booked to fight at 168. Anyone else falls out or gets injured at 167, your Denver card is going to keep taking hits. Yeah, the organization is just too thin to book a totally separate card for 168 and then again for 170. It's too thin. Hate to say it. All right, let's move on to Contender Series. So it looks like, and I did see a question about this in the chat already, so I'll get to that. It looks like we're going to have a couple Asian fighters in Dana White's Contender Series, which is great news. It means that fighters outside the Road to UFC weight classes will be able to fight for a spot in the UFC, talking about like welterweight, middleweight. It means that fighters that might be a little bit almost too good for Road to UFC can get into the UFC just with a single shot. And so I like this a lot. I've kind of complained at times that I thought that Road to UFC was becoming this like absolute wall that every single Asian fighter was expected to pass through, when not every Asian fighter should even have to go through Road to UFC. There's a handful that I think are good enough to either be signed outright or have to go through Contender Series, just one wall to clear instead of 3. I mean, and this is the way it's always worked, right? Before the UFC or before Road to UFC. Granted, some Asian fighters weren't ready for the UFC, and you know, we found that out the hard way, but there's a lot of fighters that were. Imagine forcing someone like Korean Zombie to go through 3 more fights before joining the UFC. Imagine even Zhang Weili having to fight 3 times, or Yan Xiaonan, Song Yadong. There's so many fighters that, even being young, even being fairly unknown to fight fans across the world, they shouldn't have to go through Road to UFC. And so I'm really glad that it sounds like a couple fighters may be going on Contender Series. I'm like pretty certain that Ding Meng is going to be on Contender Series. He's a welterweight fighter, got a record of 34-8. And from what I hear, he's going to be fighting in August, those first couple weeks. So I believe the dates in August are like 13th, 20th, and 27th. So I'm working on that one, working on trying to figure out what the exact date is, who the opponent is. I feel like we're starting to get waves of Contender Series news, and I'm keeping track of it all myself. And so probably, unless I can figure it out, probably someone's going to, he's going to have a Brazilian opponent or something, and someone's going to break the news. I expect we should probably find out about that really soon, but I'm honored as well. Going to see if I can figure out what's going down with Ding Meng. I have also heard rumors about Ko Suk-hyun fighting on Contender Series as well. I've heard a potential opponent for him, but I'm trying to solidify all of that. Ko Suk-hyun, really solid Korean middleweight / welterweight fighter, kind of knockout artist, goes by the nickname of Korean Tyson. He was actually, he was supposed to fight on Contender Series. Then he was supposed to fight Tailaka Nuaraji in Niza. Gosh, that would have been a crazy fight, right, guys? I don't know why exactly that fight didn't happen. I think it was something maybe more on Tailaka's end, but it sounds like UFC is trying to get Ko Suk-hyun something in the works there. Tailaka, he is fighting on at WKG on June 8th in Xinjiang province. He's fighting against a Russian guy, forget his name. If Tailaka wins that, I feel like he should be in the UFC. I don't think that he's expected to fight in Contender Series if he wins in WKG, because that would be like 2 fights that he won since appearing in Road to UFC. So I feel like the time would be perfect for him to join the UFC if he should get by this Russian guy in WKG. So those are the 3 Asian fighters, and Ding Meng's name, that's already been added to the UFC website. So that's kind of what tipped me off there. And then I saw a rumor floating around on the Chinese internet that he was going to fight in August on Contender Series. So I'm trying to solidify that. So those 3 guys, right? 2 or 3. Hopefully we get more. All right. The other news about Contender Series. Yesterday, it was announced that Learte Viana, a Brazilian journalist, reported Yuji Yannick Foviga against Kemuel Otoni, a Brazilian guy for Contender Series. I have heard since then that fight is not happening. I don't know if Foviga is still expected to be on Contender Series. He should, but I heard kind of through the grapevine from him that fight is not happening, which is a shame because Viana's usually a really trustworthy guy. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah. So I took that off my socials. That fight. Hopefully he gets slotted in there another time on Contender Series. But that fight not happening. All right. Let's get into your questions, shall we? Wang Cong, she's considered one of 3 combat sports queens in China. Weili, Kahan, and Cong. Do you find it a bit funny that Jingnan is not on that trio because she's in 1? You know, Xiong Jingnan has a really complicated legacy. I think Xiong Jingnan in 1 championship reminds me a little bit. It's kind of like WMMA in the UFC from the first 5 or 6 years. It's kind of like Xiong Jingnan is still kind of stuck in that period. I feel like she, just her legacy fighting Angela Lee a gajillion times, and then a lot of kind of one-dimensional, kind of whoever won championship could find. So I just feel like she just has not connected with broader fans. She's had some incredible fights against Angela Lee, but I just feel like she hasn't really a couple pieces that I think would have gotten her up to that level. I think she's missing, which is, a shame for her. I wish that she would have had some better opportunities in her career other than kind of those 2 options. Fighting one-dimensional specialists or the same fighter over and over again. I don't know what it is. I feel like some of that I think is 1 championship as well. It's not necessarily her fault. They have not built their women's divisions. They have not built women's strawweight like I wish they would have. They haven't recruited really any of the top strawweights around the world that I wish they would have. Even like fighters that have left the UFC, fighters that the UFC has not re-signed. There's been a lot of great strawweights like that over the years leave the UFC, and one championship just has not snatched them up. They've not built that strawweight division, and they have not kept Song Jingnan all that active the last couple of years. So really, a lot of that is on them, I think, for her lack of staying within combat MMA fans' vision. Last couple fights haven't always been that exciting either. So a lot of pieces missing from there, and I think that's why she hasn't. When you talk about like the best Chinese fighters, she's, I think, just routinely left out. So it's a shame. Only got to watch first episode of Road UFC. There are a lot of good fights, but the production seemed not as good as the first season. Do you know why? I don't know what you're trying to think of what you might be referring to there. One thing I did notice about the production was that they switched up the people on the broadcast a lot. So the episodes 1 and 3, the first episode each day had they had Alan Jouban, and then they had Mackenzie Pavicic, who's totally new to UFC broadcasts. And then episodes 2 and 4, the second episode each day, they had Michael Chiesa and Mackenzie Worth, another new person for UFC broadcasts or UFC adjacent broadcasts. So the commentators were in a studio in Las Vegas. So John Gooden plus the color commentator, and then the on the ground interviewers slash, like, I don't know, kind of third person of the broadcast, Mackenzie and Morgan, were on the ground. And so it did like change up a lot. And I was trying to think of why they would do that. And for the Las Vegas studio, I think they just figured like, we don't need to send someone, instead of sending them 13 hours away from their home time zone, we can send them 6-7 hours or even less if they're coming from the States. They can watch the fights on a giant screen. They don't necessarily need to be there, which you may lose a little bit of something if your commentators are not present in the same space. I think that you do miss something when they're like in the lead up to the event, they're doing the pre-fight interviews via Zoom. They're not around the fighters to be able to like talk to them in the hotel casually. They're not really getting like the vibe of the space there. So you may, I think, lose something a little bit with commentary when you do that. Can't be sure on that, and then I do appreciate that they had Mackenzie and Morgan go there in person, and it was their first time. Some things they kind of stumbled through a little bit. Overall, I thought they did a great job. It is such a big ask to not only be on like a UFC adjacent broadcast for the first time, but doing that as an American, doing that in Asia, where you're on this like opposite time zone schedule. You're having to work through translators all the time, language barriers, difficult to pronounce names. A lot of that is a really big, and in the meantime, you're going through like just cultural bewilderment the whole week that you're there. That is really tough and a big ask. So I think given that, I thought that Mackenzie and Morgan really stepped up to the plate. They did a great job. I think people don't realize how hard it is to do that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a tough ask to do that. So if there's a couple awkward moments with the post-fight interviews, I can forgive that. And I also really appreciate that, UFC is trying to give more people opportunities. You have to start from somewhere. I've always also felt that for as many talented women fighters as there are in the UFC, there's like severely lacking women on the broadcasts as well. Lorisenko, and Karen Bryant. Yeah, I mean, you got, Megan O'Leary, Heidi Androl, Charlie Arnold kind of walking around backstage, but we got to have more women in the pipeline, I think. So I appreciate that as well. So yeah, I think there was a couple awkward moments there, but totally understandable. I can forgive it as well. I also felt like some of the interviews they had were a little bit longer post fight, and I honestly don't mind that so much. It felt like they were able to ask a lot of fighters a couple questions instead of just one or two, and I enjoyed that, and I appreciated what they brought to the broadcast in terms of energy. So my fullest compliments to them. Appreciate them stepping up. Really impressive. I can only imagine, I'm thinking through how I would handle going to a country that, I don't know what their experience is beforehand. If, Czech Republic or some country in Africa where it's like, yeah, I obviously really stand out here. I have trouble pronouncing names. I don't know what time of day it is, all of that. That would be really hard. So mad respect to those two for sure. Devin Haney being complainy. I try not to complain too much, right? Did I watch Fury versus Usyk last weekend? Boxing, not really a thing you like to watch recreationally. I didn't watch it mostly because guys, last weekend was all road to UFC for me. I got up at freaking 2:45 a.m. on back-to-back days. And so I probably was running off of 4 hours of sleep each night. I took a nap after Road UFC. Once I had finished up the article, once I had filmed this video, a live reaction video, each of those about 30 minutes apiece, everything was good to go. I would take a nap. And then Saturday afternoon at 1:00 my time, I did the live Tapology results for the UFC event. So I try to not have a whole lot going on. I try not to have too much going on to where I can really focus in on what's in front of me. So I didn't watch it. Heard it was a great fight. I'll watch boxing fights if they're big ones and I don't have too much in front of me. But I was just trying to give all my energy to Road. And then I did the Bellator results for Tapology as well, Friday from 9 until 3:00. So I was I did so many live results last weekend, guys. So I was just purely focused on those. When those weren't going, I was either sleeping or eating, trying to recover. So did not watch him. Heard it was a great fight though. How good is Ding Meng? He is pretty good. I'm not convinced that he is UFC level yet. So let's look at his record real quick. He's good. He was a former JCK welterweight champion, and that he vacated that title, I'm guessing, for this opportunity. And that belt is now held by Kurbanjong Tulasabaka. So Ding Meng, 34 and 8 years old. His nickname is Cold-Faced Killer, is how it translates. I was actually trying to think today because I'm slowly changing some of these Chinese character nicknames into English. I was trying to think of how that would best translate into English without totally changing the meaning. I was Cold-Hearted Killer. That's not totally what the meaning is there. So I'll have to think about that. Let me know if you have any ideas on how that can translate. 29 years old, lives in Xi'an, China. So here you see his record. He's got these 2 kickboxing fights from WLF. Didn't even know he did that. I'll take those off just so we can focus on these. So really, I mean, look at his last couple fights. 2 really good guys there. And stoppage wins over Kurbanjong and Wang Chi. Originally lost a decision to Kurbanjong. Otherwise, he's got this win over Aurigola. He's got a win over Tai Laka. Pretty solid. And then had another loss against Kurbanjong. So really, he won the trilogy match. They fought for a third time and he won that one. Another win over Yongqi. Gosh, I mean, knockout machine. When was the last fight that this guy won and it went to a decision? He's got a loss or two by decision. This guy, goodness. The last time he fought to a decision and won was September of 2017. Let's look at his stats right here. You can see why the UFC would be interested in this guy. He's only gone to a decision 7 times as a whole in 42 fights, and he's got 27 wins by knockout. Pretty awesome record there. So can definitely see why the UFC would be interested in this guy. Glad he's getting the Contender Series shot. I just don't know totally, like, the competition that he's beat. And even the Tai Laka win, that was a couple years ago, and Tai Laka was like still like coming, like a super young guy, like probably a teenager when they fought. So like, he's got wins over good guys, but welterweight in China, like Ding Meng is probably the best guy at welterweight in China. And I wouldn't necessarily say there's any other welterweights in China that are like Contender Series or UFC level right now. You can maybe make the argument for Kerbin Jong, but otherwise it's a pretty not elite kind of division. So, I mean, that's what Contender Series is there for. I'm just curious. Yeah. How's he going to do? If they put him up against some like American guy with a wrestling background, how's he going to hold up? Even another Brazilian guy that's like a killer, on the feet. Either way, it should be a really exciting fight, especially if he fights another striker. I'm not totally sure yet. Saw a guy with 3,000 followers say that he was turned down for an interview by a high-profile fighter and said he wants to work hard to make an MMA. Yet he got blasted for a silly comment he made. He started to apologize to everyone because he said he does not want to make the people with larger followings angry because it will make his journey to MMA media not good. Do you agree with his approach? So, I mean, yeah, it depends. I think it depends on the outlet that you're with. If your outlet as a whole, I don't know who this guy is. So like, there's even some media members that work for publications that you and I have heard of that have smaller followings. But I'm guessing based on how you're phrasing this, it sounds like he just overall is not connected to a big following. I just feel like if you should like essentially like look at your own following, and then as a rule, unless you like have a really good connection to a fighter, as a rule of thumb, like look at fighters who have similar size followings of you, maybe a little bit bigger. And again, if you have a good connection to a really high profile fighter, go ahead, shoot your shot. But like, try, I guess, like, look at like same level kind of people. I would definitely like hold back from trying to like go for like a ranked UFC fighter, mainly because like you have to have the humility to realize that even though you may feel like a really socially comfortable person, you have to realize that your own interviewing skills are going to take some work to sharp. I mean, just like any kind of skill profession, even if you want to think about it in terms of like fighting MMA, you have to think of yourself almost as a media member as like starting out at amateur level and then going pro, fighting for regional leagues, all that kind of stuff. My first interview that I ever did was a fighter who was 1-0 and was, it was all over messaging. And then my second interview that I did, I believe, I can't remember if it was my second or third, but it was with that same fighter. after they had won 1 or 2 more. And that was a video interview. But at that time, they were like 2-0 or 3-0. And then I have interviewed a UFC fighter before. Trying to think through it. I haven't interviewed a lot of people, but I'm trying to think through, like, at that time, like, I even think that my following may have been bigger than this UFC fighter's following at the time. And I also just like had a connection with that fighter's manager already. So, and then like I've been offered interviews with other UFC fighters, and then it just like didn't pan out. Other interviews I've gotten have sometimes even been people reaching out to me for those interviews. But and I had 3 interviews that I was going to do before Road to UFC. I know this is kind of a tangent, but I it's not that I had a date locked in with those fighters, so I didn't feel too bad. But I had a couple interviews lined up this month with Road to UFC fighters, and then because of some other stuff, I had to let those interviews go. But you know, I have not even really thought about. There's been one time that I pined to get an interview with a high profile fighter. But even with that fighter, that has a much bigger following than me. But even with that fighter, this fighter follows me and has for a while. And we've messaged back and forth. And I'm also tight with this fighter's manager. So otherwise, I wouldn't even think about that. Like, I haven't even like tried to interview, you know, someone like Zhang Weili. I haven't yet, just because I feel like I am not there yet. And even with that one fighter that I had that was pretty high profile that I nearly locked in for this year, that just kind of slipped through the cracks, and it's totally fine. But even with that, I was a little bit like, should I be doing this? Like, this is a little bit, I don't know, above me. Not to like sell myself short there, but I do like, I just feel like if you're going to try to get that kind of interview, you need to like work up to that, to where like a high profile fighter can look at your page and see like, wow, they've produced a lot of great interviews with other fighters, more lower level fighters, but all these interviews have been really high quality. They have a track record of creating like a good experience for the fighter, or being really professional. And so if you don't have that, if you have that and your following is still small, then sure, go shoot your shot. But you know, I get perspective when I talk to people who worked in MMA media for like a decade before they ever went full time, and you realize how slow growing your career in MMA media is. I think if I could go back, I would try to slow things down, even for me. But you do have to think slow. There's such like a, how can I blow up quick mentality among like, and that from like the influencer side of things. But I feel like if you take the time to like grow your skills, then eventually you'll be at a place where you're like so pro level, and the opportunities will come your way. So that's kind of how I feel about that. Heard anything for where the Road to UFC second round is happening? I've heard China. I heard from some guys, the PI, a few weeks ago, that it wouldn't be in Shanghai. And so that I've heard some conflicting reports, but the most trustworthy people that I know are saying not Shanghai. So that's what I'm going with for now. I'm going to give it a sec, and then I'll check in on that in a little bit and see if we can figure out. But yeah, that's what I've heard. Familiar with the term burning bridges as a reporter, as in one will lose opportunities from whoever because things said. Yep, totally. You said you compiled a 20-minute video of JHK unfairly criticizing her the last 3 years and sent that video to her coach and manager. They've responded in a way that makes me incredibly happy. Is this a cautionary tale of being careful what you say on the internet when you have the opportunity to watch a fighter train? So burning bridges, I see people do that all the time. And to be fair, I don't think that like being critical of a fighter, I think that's different from just being critical of a fighter. All the time, you, to be fair, I've probably burnt some bridges too. I've probably burnt some bridges with one championship because of how much I criticize them. But when you're looking at your career, you just have to evaluate like what's important to you, and you can't always stay on everyone's good side. You just can't. And so, speak your mind. I think criticize people while being professional, and stay away from being stupid and burning bridges for like getting in Twitter beefs, like stupid Twitter beefs. Stay away from that. Don't burn bridges for being unprofessional. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Burn bridges for just giving your honest opinion things. Don't burn bridges for being unprofessional is what I would say. Drake said that one deserves to lose Stamp for trying to double book her. She just had surgery and may never be the same again. Do people in general overlook the ramifications of surgery? Yeah, absolutely. I think that too. I think this is all on one championship for double booking fighters. They're trying to make these events as big as they can, and they're rolling the dice, and they're losing big for that. I think that probably both of those shows will end up being okay, in the sense of like they'll still be good shows, especially 167. I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen to 168. But 167, they've still got a Tawan Chai title fight. It's a rematch. They've got Rod Tang on there. They've got Mikey Musumeci. They've got Liam Harrison. They've got Cade Rutolo. And a lot of these fights, I honestly couldn't tell you if these are like compelling fights or not, or if they're just, if they're mismatches. Itsuki Hirata fighting Victoria Souza. Sithi Chai is on there. Adrian Lee making his pro debut, and then Denise Sambawongo against Noel Grandjean. It's a fine card. Lots of big names on the card. Can't tell you if a lot of those non-MMA fights are compelling matchups or not. As far as 168, I don't know if they're going to try to find a totally new main event. If they're going to get a different opponent for Song Jingnan, there's no one for her to fight, so they're going to have to sign someone or just delay that fight, which would suck for Shong because she hardly fights as it is. Otherwise, you've got Jonathan Haggerty. I swear, guys, like, has anyone else like learned another language and then it like messes up your English? Like, my English, ever since I studied Chinese a decade ago, my English has suffered so bad, like both grammar and pronunciation. And I'll pronounce English words with Chinese pronunciation. I just pronounce it like Jonathan instead of Jonathan. Yeah, gosh. Haggerty's fighting Superlek. That's a pretty big fight. Cade Rutolo against Mikey Musumeci, who are both booked on 167, and then Liam Harrison. So, like, literally two of those fights are in jeopardy if someone doesn't make it after 167. Liam Harrison against Saxon. So, that fight card could be totally different from what it is right now. But yeah, the moral of the story is don't double book. Don't do it. Resist the urge. I know it's tough. Do I consider Sportskeeda as a legit website? Recently this week, it was revealed that Dylan Bolker published fake payouts. No, as well as the other dude everyone was roasting. Have I blacklisted Sportskeeda? I take it you're meaning Sportkeeda. You're saying Sportkeeda. Their whole grift is publishing fake payouts to casuals who Google payouts, get the wrong idea, which is what the UFC wants in the first place. Sportskeeda. I don't go to that page often. I don't really read the articles. I don't follow them on social media except for Nick Atkin. Nick Atkin, he's with Sportskeeda. James Lynch, also with Sportskeeda. Two exceptional media members. I think things are probably a little mixed, I would say. Nick is a phenomenal media member. You could accuse him of being favorable to one championship, but I think he's actually a lot more fair than other people are or other outlets. Like there's some media outlets that are basically just an extension of one championship PR. It's just onefc.com extended. That's all it is. Nick, while you can tell he is like favorable to one championship, he also doesn't shy away from bringing up negative things about one championship. If a fighter has beef with one championship, he posts about it. He acknowledges some of the criticisms instead of just literally like whitewashing as though he works for one PR. So yeah, he has a close relationship with Chatri, a lot of the fighters. And I honestly wonder if it would be hard not to, if you've been to so many events, you have a close relationship with so many people. It probably is. But I think Nick, he's an exceptional media member. James Lynch, I mean, there's literally nothing bad you can say about him. If you haven't checked out James's YouTube series where he interviews other media members, highly recommend. Kind of like my newest addiction is catching up on those interviews. Otherwise, though, for sport, and I've actually worked for Sportskeeda before, and I think their one championship coverage can be really like just talk about the positive, don't talk about avoid all these topics. I do wrestle with how to communicate this because on the one hand, like everyone that I worked for at Sportskeeda was really good to me. They paid me like fairly well working for them. They gave me a lot of work. And it was like for the most part, a pretty good opportunity working for them. And so it's always like tricky. I always like wrestle with how to like talk about previous employers that I had a good interaction with, but there was like maybe a couple things that I didn't agree with. And so I don't know, I'm not going to throw too much dirt on them. There were a couple like media practices that I didn't agree with that I was like, this kind of removes you from being like a totally fair or biased or unbiased source. You're venturing into like, we're just here to prop up one championship because they're basically paying us for favorable coverage. So there is that side to it that I really don't like. Posting payouts is like, yeah, a big kind of a red flag as well. So I tend to follow individuals more than I follow outlets. Is kind of how I roll. So Nick and James are exceptional. Thinking that they might try to book Tai Laka to fight in Road UFC. Yeah. And you said you think they might book Tai Laka to fight Cohen Road UFC. Well, I mean, that would be really exciting. That fight was supposed to happen in Niza last Friday, the 18th. Again, I don't know why it didn't work out. I'd heard that Tai Laka didn't have any kind of commitment to Niza. His fights with them were one fight deals. And so I think he just wanted to fight elsewhere is what I had heard. but that fight was in the works, which would have been like one of the most exciting fights of the year, I think. But otherwise, sometimes I'm like, hey, if we don't have to, do we have to put two Asian prospects against each other when there's so many others? I mean, I'd love it if like Kosakyun and Tailaka Nuraji could fight other fighters so that they both have the opportunity to get into the UFC, just selfishly speaking. But glad it didn't happen. Not a good matchup for Ko. Yeah, opinion on Ding Meng and Contender Series. He's facing Islam Dulatov on September 3rd, really tough fight. Yeah, I heard Dulatov was fighting on September 3rd. Actually, let me see about that. I did hear a date for Dulatov. Or let me see. I have the document that I share, my calendar that I share with all of you. And then I have another more secret one where I put a lot of things that are very, very, very unofficial. So yeah, Islam Dulatov. Let's just look at the main schedule here. There's still a lot of unannounced fighters for this first couple days. So I had heard Tailaka was going to, Ding Meng was going to fight in August. So I'm not sure if that would happen. So Dulatov, yeah, is for September 3rd. Two other fights on that card. I don't have any fights marked down for August 20th and 2 fights for the 13th, which on the 13th, I know we've talked about Lonar Kavanaugh and like, is he Chinese? Is he not? Tricky subject. But we do technically, if you're counting him as Chinese, technically have an Asia versus Asia fight on week 1 with An Twin Ho against Lonar Kavanaugh, which is a sensational fight, guys. Sensational. But yeah, still a lot of openings on those first couple weeks. I think probably Ding Meng will fight in August. Other welterweights, at least ones that I've heard about, Cody Steele, who is half Korean. He's a welterweight. Kemuel Otoni, Pat Pitlick, of course, Islam Dulatov, and Gage Young. I heard a rumor about Gage Young fighting someone else, maybe Tommy McMillan, who's Gage. It's actually like where I'm from versus where I came from. Gage Young, I watched him fight in FAC when I would cover their events in person in Kansas City. Tommy McMillan is based out of the Pacific Northwest, so I put in all of his fight results now for Tapology. 2 really good prospects as well. So we'll see. Did I like that Cedric Doumbé brought it was so amazing. Brought a cordless vacuum to his walkout to make fun of PFL for not cleaning the cage when he got a shard of glass in his foot, or a piece of wood or something. I don't even know if that was a dig at PFL or not for not cleaning. I mean, honestly, like, you just saw it. It was the tiniest splinter. Things like that happen. We cannot fully get every scrap of dust off the cage floor. I don't think it was that. It was just hilarious, but did enjoy that fight. Really hope we get Cedric Doumbé against Anthony Pettis. That would be I think that's like the perfect fight to make right now. Really fun. Adding to my question about Jingnan earlier, is that a sentiment you agree with, that Jingnan is not part of the, is that a real word? Triumvirate of combat sports queens. Keihan is an exceptional kickboxer. Zong is known for being Valentina, also a great kickboxer in her own right. Whaley, self-explanatory. Well, I mean, I guess. I mean, I don't know if that's really a thing, maybe among hardcore fans, but I mean, there's a handful of, I mean, when you're talking about like the gold standard, Wang Zong, I mean, I can't speak to Kahan because I don't follow kickboxing, but I feel like Whaley is pretty far above Wang Zong. Even like Wang Zong has beaten Valentina. I'm not really even totally sure how extensive and illustrious her kickboxing career was besides beating Valentina. But also like Valentina wasn't, I don't know how big of a name she was at the time that they fought. And Wang Song, I mean, in MMA, she just is not that accomplished just yet. She's built, I think that she will build a really big fan base. She's got all the tools necessary to become a big star. She's got the persona. I feel like she's got the like confidence, the enthusiasm. She's got the nickname, the Joker, dressed up in the face paint the other day. Great finishes. Just kind of has that, like, she's got the aura. Hard to totally define. So I think that she will be really successful in the UFC. And I think that she will probably get at least into the top 5 at flyweight, if not fight for a belt. I really do think that. So I think that she'll get there, but I feel like Weili is way above that. So I don't know. It's like even like Yan Xiaonan has achieved a lot more so far in her career. I mean, other Chinese, there's even other Chinese women that I think are probably a little more accomplished in MMA terms that haven't quite reached the popularity of some of the other counterparts. We'll see how far Dong Huashang can go. I think that she could get there. I think that she could be a big star. I was not that all that impressed with her fight against Priya Sharma. Priya is a tough opponent. I think a tough opponent for Dong to look good against. I wonder if there was some ring rust going into it. She's been through a lot the last couple of years, not totally active, hasn't really fought top competition when she has. And I even was chatting with Dong Huashang the other day, and she was like, yeah, like really disappointed with my performance. So I think that there is a lot better from her. And I think that she has a couple pieces in place to become a big star. I think that her training is a big thing, who she aligns herself with. I hope that she stays close with the UFC PI and really like trusts and leans into her coaching there. I think if that's the case, then she could really be like a breakout star and go really far. But we'll see on that. Interesting question though. I mean, and then Shiming, like, I think that overall her ceiling is quite a bit lower than Wang Zong, even Dong Huashang, but she does, I think, also have a lot of elements about her that could really like connect her with fans. Speaking English is one thing. And then I just feel like she has a lot of personality quirks that are really like beloved by fans. So, oh gosh, Feng Chao. So many Chinese women, I think, coming up, and a lot to look forward to with Chinese MMA with women. I could go on, but I digress. All right, moving on. Saying that for the broadcast for Road UFC, the broadcast was not as sharp. The fights would cut to commercials on ESPN Plus and sometimes crash. Chiesa was a downgrade from Sanko. It didn't seem like he did a lot of research. To be fair, Laura Sanko has already done like every single round of Road to UFC leading up to this. And so that gives her, just like John Gooden has, so that gives her and John, I think, an automatic advantage. Chiesa, overall, I think is a really good commentator. I enjoy listening to him a lot on the LFA broadcasts. So I didn't have a problem with him as much. I mean, yeah, he wrestled with some of the like Asian, the Asian fighters. So, but you know, it was his first time. It's really tough to do that. I think you almost just have to have like a lot of experience doing that, like Sanko and Gooden do. Commercials, I didn't have any commercials on mine. It was just like rapid fire. Even like compared to Contender series, like Road to UFC is so exhausting for me to cover because, oh gosh, I did this to myself. I made a post on Instagram for every single winner, which was 19 posts, in addition to Wang Song being signed to the UFC. I did a reaction video, I did a recap article, and I did live results for Tapology and for my page, which for Tapology, you're also putting in referee names, you're putting in, hometowns, metrics on the fighters, reach, height, all that stuff. So, and Road to UFC for me, there was just like no break in between fights, just back to back to back. So I was just like struggling to keep up. But if anything, it kept me awake. So that was on Fight Pass. I don't know how you all watched it, but don't know if you saw the graphic of MMA Orbit blatantly plagiarizing Marcel's fight announcements. Is that a viable way to create a large following? Just flat out copy stuff with a blue tick. I also saw that Aaron Bronstetter is blocking both him and the MMA Orbit, which or him and who's the guy that runs it? Not Garrett. Garrett's another guy that people have had a problem with. Well, it looks like he might have deleted it, but yeah, apparently MMA Orbit just basically like copy and pasted a recap that Aaron did over the weekend and didn't credit him. So he like posted like, hey, this is what they did. I blocked them. I encourage you to do the same. Ugh, yikes. It's a good way to like gain a following. I mean, MMA Orbit has a lot of followers and they've broken a couple fights too. I don't know if it's more than one guy or if it's just one guy. But they do have 70,000 followers, guys, which is insane. Totally. I mean, just by merit of being active all the time, posting all the time, and fairly like high quality graphics. I say that not as though they're like, graphic artists geniuses, but all the stuff they post are really simple and they don't look bad. But it's going to bite you in the butt. I mean, we talk about burning bridges. That's one way of being unprofessional that it might help you blow up right away, but you're going to burn bridges. If you want long-term viability in the sport outside of your own platform, you're burning bridges for sure. So it's unfortunate. Here's my thing with the other women in the commentary booth. They're not as well researched as spoken to Sanko. It's not because they're women. Compare them to Sanko, you can clearly see the level of work and research puts into the current broadcast crew they have now. Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing you're talking about Mackenzie and Morgan doing post-fight interviews. I could tell they did research going up to that event, and even bringing up interacting with fighters throughout the week. I mean, one of the advantages of being on the ground. So I think that they worked hard that week. They did everything that they could. I just think that it's hard to hop into that and have it be your first time. And these fighters aren't even UFC fighters. And there's so many of them as well. You can't be an expert on every single fighter. Even going into it for me, there were literally fighters in this tournament that I didn't even know anything about. And I was planning on doing research on every single fighter and making a video for all of them. Again, I had to eventually drop a lot of things in my schedule for some other things, but it's impossible to just be a brainiac on everything. I do wonder, is there someone out there in the media that does already kind of have an in with a lot of fighters, or just familiarity with the Asian MMA scene? I mean, surely not me, right? But is there someone, and to be fair, I'm not saying I should have taken their job. Totally, they are so much more skilled than what I could do in a lot of ways. So I'm not saying that, but is there someone else out there that at least kind of has a history with Asian MMA fighters that that you could put on a broadcast that can be a little bit of semi-expert, maybe. It's not just being an expert; it's also the presence as well that you give. So there's a couple things that go into it. I just feel like for them, like, it's your first time. Road to UFC, yeah, it is a big product. It's UFC adjacent, but at the same time, it's not UFC. It's not going to be as watched by as many people. And so I didn't really have a problem with it. I think, like, if I'm in their position, like, yeah, it's like I got thrown into the fire for my first gig. There's so many takeaways I'm going to have. I'm going to be able to, like, go through things, like review how I did with more experienced people, and keep sharpening things. Maybe I get put on some other broadcasts like LFA, CFFC, things like that. And so, like, or Fight Pass content. I think Road to UFC personally is like a great place to sort of like test run people that are working their way in there. And there's so many positive things about what they did too. And so, yeah, I didn't really have a problem with it. Media guy mentioned earlier was an independent interviewer. Yeah. Kind of hard for me to say. How does one create anger within an MMA fan community? Hot takes, say things like Colby and Strickland, be like Khabib and Islam and have their manager talk for them. Exactly. Yeah. It's very hard. There's really only a few fighters out there that are just like universally loved by everybody. I mean, whether intentionally or unintentionally, like, most of us in the space are going to make people mad, and you can't always prevent that. I mean, we're talking about trying to establish your career partially through Twitter or X. Like, just think about that. Like, even being as professional as you can be, having like semi-sensible takes, like, you're going to make people mad, and you have to be at peace with that. So there's 100 ways to make people mad. So you're saying Ghost explained that Whaley doesn't take Western interviews unless it's fight week. She says she no longer trusts Western media because of the portrayal of her in 2021. Well, I mean, that's her decision. It's her decision. So yeah. Spoke about Adrian Lee before. It really annoys me that they put so much pressure on a young prospect after seeing what that did to his brother. I think Christian Lee is, I mean, from what we can tell publicly, it seemed like his journey has been a little bit more chill and a little more linear. I'm blanking on whether he fought in MMA outside and pro MMA outside of one championship, or if he's literally fought. He has a 17-4 record. If he's literally fought for them 21 times. So no, he has fought literally every single MMA fight. Every single one of the Lee siblings has fought every single MMA fight within one championship. Different people can handle it differently. We'll see what kind of attention they give Christian Lee. I would have loved it if they would have maybe put him on some Friday Fights events just to kind of test things out. Friday Fights events have a lot less spotlight on them. I mean, you see, like, they hardly give fighters like any kind of shine before Friday Fights events, especially if they're not in the main event. I don't know. I'm just like, man, let him just hang out at that low level for a long time. It's not like, I mean, the difference between Angela Lee and Victoria Lee is that the weight classes that Adrian fights in are a little bit deeper. So it's not like you fight the bottom three people in the division and it's like, shoot, well, we're going to fight someone ranked now, So I think they have a little bit more leeway to give him low level fights for a while. But we'll see. It is frustrating to me as well. And, we've talked about that. So we'll just have to see. How much does Sportskeeda's shortcomings cause distrust in the exceptional media members? I can't really speak to that. There's a couple exceptional media members that work for Sportskeeda. So there's that. But really, does it matter a whole lot if Sportskeeda, I mean, they have a lot of people writing for them. When I worked for Sportskeeda, I only covered their one championship. I'm looking to see what kind of following they have. I only covered their one championship stuff for them. And there was like probably a dozen of us that worked there. That's not even like their UFC wing. So Sportskeeda MMA has 45,000 followers. Not bad on Instagram. I think it's a little less on Twitter. But I'm like, if you have a big following and tons of traffic on your pages, the thing is, so Sportskeeda, they are Indian owned. And so like they cover a lot of cricket as well. Yeah, their Twitter following is pretty small. So they cover a lot of sports, and they have a pretty big audience in India, I think. So I think that gives them a lot of traffic. But yeah, I can't really speak to like what their reputation is with other media members. Someone on Tapology said Ding Mung versus Islam Dulatov is official. I am not so sure about that. Let me just look that up. Someone on Tapology? I don't know who you're talking about there. I mean, there's not a whole lot of people that work for them. Looking up to see, we haven't listed Islam Dulatov against Ding Mung on Tapology. I know what you mean. Someone on the, like a message board probably on Tapology. I would not trust that, because there has been a lot of reports about Contender Series fights already that have not been true. So there's a couple Twitter accounts of people that post Contender Series news, and a lot of those fights have not been true at all. So like people are talking about Fatima Klein being on Contender Series. I bet she eventually will, but I haven't seen anything. I don't know where that rumor came from. Originally, I heard that people were posting that she was going to fight Rose Conceição, and I was like, where's that coming from? And now people are saying that she's going to fight a different Brazilian fighter. And I'm like, guys, what's going on? And then there's the Fo Viga versus a Tony fight. That's not happening. So take Contender Series news with a big grain of salt. I'm like following Nolan King on that. He is pretty much right on with Contender Series news, but take every other Contender Series news with a grain of salt, I would say, unless I say it, of course. But yeah, glad if Aviga isn't on Contender Series, hasn't fought one decent opponent in Japan. Yeah, that is a knock on him a little bit. I mean, he is 8-0, but I wouldn't be mad if he was on Contender Series. I almost feel like Road to UFC may have been a better option just because of what you said of like not really fighting the best of competition. I mean, guys, we see fighters on Contender Series that have weak records all the time. So it wouldn't be all that out of character for Contender Series, I think. But we'll see. Is the Lee clan part owners of one championship? I don't know that. I haven't heard that. I don't know what their like deeper ties are aside from just being like super, super buddy with one championship. I don't know if they have any stake in it or in Evolve MMA or what. But we shall see. Christian Lee is supposed to fight November 170, and defend the lightweight belt. The welterweight belt, and this is all per Nick Atkins' interview with Chatri, welterweight belt supposed to go down an interim title around the same time, and apparently they've got 2 guys lined up for that. So we will have to see, right? All right, that does it for me, guys. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Appreciate all your questions. Enjoy the chat as usual. Enjoy the fights this weekend. All those results will be up on my Instagram on MMAecosystem.com. Check the calendar for the full listing, broadcast times, and broadcast channels. But for me, signing off from Portland, Oregon, we'll see you next time.